Brunch with a Scurry of Squirrels by Kate Lawley. Read for you by Meg Price. I loved animals. I did. Promise, with all the heart crossing and pinky swearing included. But there was something seriously wrong with the squirrels in my yard. It was just me, on my one day off, hanging out on my patio. It was one of those oddball November days where the sun shone so brightly and the sky was such a sparkling blue that the bite in the air had to be ignored. I bundled up and planted myself on my partially enclosed patio as the scent of wood smoke tickled my nose. The plan was to finally read the book I'd bought back in September. Tracking down all of my cursed candy and putting murderous witches behind bars had killed my reading time this past month. Bryson had left for Austin a few days ago. Great Aunt Sophia was at water aerobics, and my boyfriend, sort of fiancé, was busy working. Poor Bastion. He refused to retire from his position as ICWP's lead detective without tying up loose ends. All the loose ends. So he'd been occupied with mind-numbing administrative details the last few days. I offered to keep him company at Magic Beans, but he'd encouraged me to take a little time for myself. Wrapped in a cozy blanket, fingerless gloves on my hands, and a good paperback in my lap, I couldn't say I was sorry to miss out on the collating and filing. Sinking into my comfy nest, I flipped to the first page and started reading. Minutes of blissful escape followed. But then, just as the hot hero of my novel was meeting the spunky heroine, I heard the chittering of squirrels. The neighbors had a sweet elderly dog. She didn't see so well, and hearing wasn't always great based on the neighbors' repeated calls for her to come inside right now, Bella. But I'd met her on walks several times, and she was a doll. Turns out, Bella's senses weren't so dulled by age that she missed the wag of two sassy squirrel tails in her face, followed by the teasing chattering of her tormentors. A pair of squirrels ran down the trunk of a tree until they disappeared below the fence line, then raced back up, evading the barking Bella. It must have been an entertaining game for all concerned, because it continued for several minutes. After the fourth or fifth iteration, the intermittent, frustrated barking came to an end when my neighbor retrieved her dog and brought her inside. No problem. Squirrels teased, dogs barked, but all was now silent, and the pages of my book called. Hockey player Jake needed a good ego check, and I was ready to see the heroine deliver it. 4 pages later, I glanced up to find that the 2 squirrels I'd observed running up and down the neighbor's tree, or 2 very like them, had decided to chase another one in my yard instead. I returned my book and read another several pages before the chattering of squirrels interrupted a pivotal romantic moment. When I looked up, I found that the original 2 had been joined by several more. I now had 7 squirrels in my yard. Not so very odd. What was unusual, however, was their behavior. They were no longer racing along the narrow top of the fence or climbing up and down trees. They were congregated in my yard, staring at me. I blinked. Still staring. That couldn't be, because squirrels didn't stare. They chased and chittered, teased and leapt. They were still for brief moments, only to caper away at dizzying speeds. Except this group of squirrels wasn't capering. All 7 were still and staring. It was creepy as heck. Unnerved by the weight of all those dark, glassy eyes, I retreated to my kitchen. Lunch sounded like a great idea, versus being stared at by a bunch of mutant squirrels. After I'd fixed a sandwich, I returned to my patio nest of cushions and blankets. Not a squirrel, mutant or otherwise, in sight. Not that a gaggle of rodents would deny me the joys of a rare sunny November day. I paused with the sandwich inches from my mouth, the sharp tang of mustard made my mouth water, and yet a gaggle of squirrels? That wasn't right. Not at all. What was a group of squirrels? And then, as if I'd conjured them, they were back. 6, 7, 8, 9 of them this time? They were multiplying. Why is there a gaggle of squirrels in my yard? They laughed. Or at least they seemed to, as all of them broke into synchronized chittering. And now I was feeling judged by a bunch of squirrels. Gaggle? Group? Bunch? Who actually knew the word for a herd of squirrels? Rather than let the question bounce around in my head unanswered, I relinquished the work of art I'd constructed for my lunch in favor of answers. I set my plate on the coffee table and retrieved my phone from the side pocket of my leggings. A few taps later, and Google revealed that a group of squirrels was a scurry. I now knew that a scurry of curiously intense and possibly judgmental squirrels inhabited my yard, but hadn't a clue as to why. The hair on the back of my neck stood at attention as I contemplated the mystery of my yard's sudden attractiveness to small creatures. Were their nuts more plentiful here than elsewhere? Perhaps they decided my yard was the safest location for their winter caching of food, since I had no dog. Though none of that explained the staring. The staring was weird. I tucked my phone away and retrieved my plate. My empty plate. My bare, sandwich-free, crumb-free plate. Swear words might have passed my lips. I scanned the yard, but the scurry had, well, they'd scurried. Not a single squirrel remained. They couldn't have, could they? 2 slices of whole grain toasted to perfection and slathered with mayo and mustard, a thick slice of ham, white cheddar tomatoes, and lettuce. The weight of the thing alone was prohibitive. They'd had neither the time nor the ability to tear it apart. Also, no crumbs. I stood and shook out my blanket, as if a sandwich could be hiding amongst the soft purple folds. Shocker, my food didn't fall out. And it wasn't under the coffee table, hidden in the cushions, or under my chair. And yes, I did truly search in all of those places. I considered texting Bastion or my great aunt and asking them if we had magic squirrels in Boise, but that seemed crazy, even for the magic community. No way we had our own special brand of sandwich-stealing, witch-staring squirrels. Though there had been that moment right before I discovered my empty plate. A moment that had felt an awful lot like my witchy intuition making itself known. But magic squirrels? My stomach growled, forestalling any further contemplation of small mammals with voracious appetites and secret powers. I refused to consider any situation on an empty stomach that wasn't an actual emergency. And possibility of magical squirrels was not, could not be, an emergency. Delivery looked like a mighty fine option. There was a soup, salad, and sandwich place down the road that would get me a replacement in less than 45 minutes. Since that was the last of my ham, it seemed like the best option. I made the call, then returned to Jake and Penelope. Jake had nicely bulging muscles and an attitude in need of adjusting. Penelope was clever and not about to compromise her principles no matter how hot the guy was or how big his bulging bits bulged. However intriguing Jake and Penelope might be, I couldn't get lost in the couple's guaranteed happily ever after. And why was that? Because squirrels. They disappeared, but I had a hunch that they were still near, lingering, waiting for something. Worrisome, because hunches were basically 2 steps away from factual evidence for intuitive witches. My magical basics, like potions and spells, might be subpar, but I'd rocked the intuitive witch gig. Usually. I probably should have paid attention to that funny feeling I had right about the time my sandwich went AWOL. Much faster than the suggested 45 minutes, my phone pinged with a warning that my driver would be arriving shortly. I wouldn't hear the knock from my patio, so with a final glare at my seemingly empty yard, I headed to the driveway. A teenager pulled up in an old sedan with the shop's magnetic logo stuck on the side. He hopped out of the car, leaving his door ajar, and retrieved 2 large paper bags from the back seat. Losing a sandwich to rodents, potentially magical rodents, was traumatic, or so my stomach had claimed as I had ordered. If I wasn't planning on eating my feelings, I'd have ordered the shop's fancy version of a ham sandwich and nothing else. But I was definitely eating my feelings. A bowl of soup, a bag of chips, a salad, a side of macaroni and cheese, except meal size, so maybe not technically a side, and a slice of carrot cake. And that was what happened when I'd order food online while both starving and angry at small furry critters. After confirming that I was Lena Dorchester, I thanked the kid and accepted the bags. It was in this crucial moment, as the savory sense of my replacement lunch filled my nose and my fingers clutched both bags, that it happened. Movement registered on the very edge of my peripheral vision. I turned to the car in time to catch the frisky fluffing of a bushy tail before it disappeared. The glimpse I'd caught had included evidence of a single perpetrator. But I knew where one troublemaking squirrel appeared, a scurry was sure to be near. What had they done? The smell of mustard from one of the bags I held was a reminder of these particular squirrels' preferences. They liked well-made sandwiches. As the driver settled himself in his car once again, I peered in the back seat to find it suspiciously barren of additional bags. "Done with your deliveries for the day?" I asked hopefully. "No, I still have 2 more before—" He stopped abruptly when a quick glance over his shoulder revealed no more bags of food. Even though my reaction was irrational, I clutched my own bags tight to my body. My stash might be 3 days' worth of calories I didn't need, but it was mine. I wasn't about to let those squirrels score my booty, and at this point, I believed them capable of just about anything when it came to the acquisition of good food. "I don't understand. There were 2 bags. Just now, when I grabbed your delivery, there were—" The look on his confused teenage face pricked my guilt. Technically, I wasn't responsible. The squirrels were. Those furry critters were all kinds of magic. No other way could they have managed a coordinated attack on my lunch and this kid's remaining delivery otherwise. I sighed. They'd even used me as a decoy. The sneaky little devils. Chewing the inside of my lip, I considered my options. Not that there were many. Magic was the big secret that should not be named. But even assuming it wasn't, what would I say? The squirrels did it? Maybe you misremembered how many deliveries you have? He stared wide-eyed back at me. There were 2 bags in the back seat, like just now when I grabbed your order, lady. Wow. Weird. Yeah, that's all I had. I did slip him 2 extra 20s, but it didn't really help with the guilt. I wanted to apologize, but that would only raise more questions. Once he'd loaded his pale face and his confusion back into his car, I returned to the patio. I'd like to say that I refused to be intimidated by mischievous, bushy-tailed rodents with unexplainable skills. But I sat my butt back down in my chair, wrapped myself in my ultra-soft purple blanket, and ate my very late lunch. I didn't. Jake and Penelope were gone. Those furry freaks had stolen my paperback. It was the last straw. First, the staring, then my sandwich, and then I had to witness that poor kid's confusion over the theft of his sandwiches. But nabbing my romance novel? It was like they'd stolen the last bit of joy from my day. It was a step too far. I had to escape Satan's minions, so I fled to Magic Beans, paper bags in hand. I fumed for the entire 7-minute drive. Shocker, the fuming didn't make me feel any better. What did? When I walked into the coffee shop, Trixie took one look at me and said, "Chai latte, full fat milk?" That made me feel better. Yes, thank you, yes, you are a goddess. Turned out, Magic Bean's new barista had the very much coveted feel for making coffee. She could suss out a patron's perfect brew with a single glance. The fact that she was making me a chai latte was a testament to both her intuitive skill and my stress level. The last full-fat chai I'd drunk had been in the midst of a criminal case. I rubbed my temple and contemplated how I'd been bested by a gaggle of squirrels. Scurry of squirrels, whatever. I'd helped bring 3 magical criminals to justice in the last few weeks, including 2 killers. And yet a handful of beady-eyed rodents had chased me from my home. Granted, they were super creepy, probably magical rodents. But still, as Trixie busied herself fixing what I was sure would be the perfect remedy to my stress, she said, "You want to talk about it?" "Not sure I know you well enough for this one." With a glance over her shoulder, she raised her eyebrows. "Now I'm intrigued. Lay it on me." Shoot, why not? Don't suppose you know anything about demon-possessed squirrels? She almost dropped the small metal pitcher she was using to heat the milk for my chai. Interesting. I let her finish without quizzing her, because she was busy making me a fabulous drink. No need to distract her while she was making art. When she delivered my drink, I took a sip, and it was, of course, both sublime and exactly what I needed. "You were about to tell me about your experience with squirrels?" "Was I?" Her lips quirked, but her amusement seemed reluctant. "Demon possessed, huh?" I snorted. "Heck yeah! You haven't seen what those devils have been up to." But then I hesitated, because it was all so ridiculous. Unbelievably so. The glaring looks, the sandwich stealing ×2, and the book theft, especially that part. Meat-eating squirrels I could buy, but squirrels who stole romance books? Who would believe that? Not even magical squirrels would steal Jack and Penelope. Would they? "You're thinking you've imagined it." Maybe. I hadn't, though. My sandwich was gone. The book, too. And the delivery driver didn't make up 2 more stops and his missing orders. Trixie glanced at the closed office door at the back of the shop. The office Bastion, her boss, currently occupied. "I have a confession to make. It's possible the, squirrels might be my fault." I couldn't see how. But even if she'd led them to my yard like the Pied Piper of squirrels, which she definitely hadn't done, why was she worried about Bastion's reaction? "Your fault how?" Bastion I'd get to in a second. "I brought them from Austin, maybe?" She groaned at the look on my face. "Probably not." She'd only recently moved here, but I was pretty darn sure her U-Haul hadn't been big enough for wildlife transport. "I'm going to hazard a guess that you didn't ship them?" She covered her face, then peeked over the tips of her fingers. "I really like this job." Voice firm, I told her the truth. Intuitive witch ear. When I spoke the truth, people believed me. "You're not getting fired over some critter antics. Now spill. How are you responsible for misbehaving squirrels in my backyard?" "I'm a creature whisperer." Her quiet words clarified nothing. I must have looked as confused as I felt, because she quickly went on to explain. Like a demon hunter, except not limited to demons, and I don't actually hunt anything. So, nothing like a demon hunter, which, by the way, I've never heard of. Being the newest, least informed witch in any given conversation sucked as much as it had yesterday. It was getting old. Right. So, I have this unusual magical talent that lets me know when creatures are around. My magic also draws them in. She bit her lip. More like gnawed on it. Ah, so you didn't import the squirrels from Austin. You attracted the locals. When she nodded, I pointed out the obvious flaw. Except they're not in your yard. Well, her glance flitted once again to the office door. That's a little more complicated, but probably to do with you being a frequent Magic Beans customer. Also, they're not exactly squirrels. Satan's minions? Seemed as likely as anything else, given their behavior. Her lips twitched, but the smile didn't win. Furry fairies. They just look like squirrels. It's a sort of camouflage. I blinked. I'm being harassed by... I snort giggled. Furry fairies? Then she smiled. Yeah, I'm really sorry. I hoped my problem would stay in Austin, that moving here would help me make a fresh, creature-free start. I was being pranked by furry fairies. I chuckled, but then, wait, they're not dangerous, are they? No, and I can give you some tips for fairy-proofing your house and yard. Thanks, I replied, eyeing her curiously. Trixie the Creature Whisperer. Now that was a cool kind of magic. Not that I'd want to get stuck with it if it meant all sorts of magical critters following me around, but it was interesting and unique. All I had was a decent skill with intuition and magic that could sometimes be triggered by familiar scents. So boring compared to a creature whisperer. What other kinds of creatures should I keep an eye out for? She exhaled, and with that breath, I saw her entire body relax. Had she really believed we'd blame her for a few furry fairies? This time it was me glancing at Bastion's door. Or fire her over her unique ability? Do you have trees in your yard? She asked. When I said I did, several, in fact, she grinned. Well, you might want to keep an eye out for dragons. They're much smaller than you'd think and like to roost in the lower branches of trees. Mini dragons, furry fairies, and who knew what other kinds of creatures? Sounds pretty exciting. At least this barista didn't have revenge in her heart and murder on her to-do list. I could live with a few furry fairies. And who wouldn't want to see a mini dragon roosting in their tree? These mini dragons, they're not into pranks, are they? She laughed, but she didn't say no. I'd quiz her more on that if it turned out I had a gaggle of mini dragons roosting in my yard. Or would that be a flight? Or nope. I drew a blank. What's a group of dragons called? A scourge. That didn't sound promising. You know, those furry fairies snagged the book I was reading. Do they eat paper or use it for their nests? Because really, what else could they possibly be doing with my book? She grinned. Romance? At my nod, she laughed. They love romances. The prankster furry fairies like to read romance? Maybe we'd get along after all. After we came to an understanding about my food. I need some dirt on these furry fairies. An hour later, I was hanging out on my patio, getting ready to eat an avocado BLT. I'd already had a good look around my yard and hadn't spotted any kind of animal that might possibly be a mini dragon. A shame, even if Trixie claimed they looked a lot like bald chickens with really long wings. Bald chickens. Some things shouldn't be Googled. The trauma of bald chicken pictures that I could never unsee aside. I was doing pretty great. I had a plan. My secret weapon was stashed in my pocket, ready for deployment. I also had a special sack for furry fairy containment. Okay, it was a spelled lingerie bag, but I didn't want to suffocate one of the little dudes, so it was the best I could come up with. All I had to do was wait for my moment. When I set my sandwich down and looked away, it needed to look natural because furry fairies were no one's fool. After I ate 2 bites, I set the sandwich down on the plate I'd left atop the coffee table and casually reached for my phone. Instead of tapping away, I pulled out my secret weapon, glitter. I was proud of myself. I'd even managed to find a more eco-friendly version, even on short notice. The stuff was supposedly like catnip for fairies to the nth degree. That made no sense at all, because glitter had no smell. But whatever. So long as it worked as a distraction, I had no complaints. Apparently, they couldn't help but wallow in it when they found piles of it, which was what happened when I dumped a bunch of silver glitter onto my patio the moment my eyes left my sandwich. Wallowing furry fairies. I swallowed my laughter on the off chance it would offend them. I was here to negotiate, after all. Yeah, that's right. I'd opened up diplomatic talks by spreading glitter to entice wallowing, and then nabbing one of the blissed out creatures in a furry fairy proofed lingerie bag. I had 3 to choose from. Without much thought, I snatched the one closest. Turned out, he was the leader of this little gang. Here's what we negotiated. I would provide the following each week, preferably on Sunday, no later than noon: 1 ham sandwich with no mustard, plentiful cheese, and at least half a large avocado on untoasted wheat bread. 1 romance of unspecified subgenre. They were definitely getting squirrel shifter paranormal romance. I checked, and it existed. And a small supply of glitter for their personal use, specifically the plant-based silver variety I'd use today. And in return, peace. That's what I got. Blissful peace. They wouldn't invade the house, though Trixie had already chatted with me about how to prevent an incursion, and they'd let me enjoy my patio without interruption or pilfering of any kind. They were thieving sneaks, but they also weren't human and didn't live by human rules. If a little give on my end produced harmony, I was willing to give it a try. And I couldn't wait to hear what they thought of the Squirrel Shifter books. This has been Brunch with a Scurry of Squirrels by Kate Lawley. Read for you by Meg Price. Copyright 2021 by Kate Lawley. Production copyright 2021 by Kate Lawley.